So one of the takeaways I would love for all of the bombshells out there is when we're talking about big concepts like conflict or leadership or proactive thinking, those are just concepts and they're very aspirational. But being able to put kind of behaviors and answer the question, it's not just what we do, but this is how we do it here that is representative of who we are, what the brand stands for, how we manage risk, how we view conflict, and even how we want to start approaching these conversations when we disappoint each other.
Welcome back to the Bombshell Business Podcast. I'm your host, Amber Hurdle, and we're going to talk about, interestingly, maybe is not the right word, but it's one of my favorite topics because there is constant conflict in the world, and there's certainly conflict, whether it's positive or negative, in the workplace. And a lot of us really struggle with that. We struggle with confrontation. We struggle with feeling a different way than somebody else and not really knowing how to process that in real time. And so I'm very excited to have this conversation with our guest today because she's the expert. So we can unpack it and hopefully provide you with some tools to help empower you as you deal with conflict yourself in the workplace. So let me tell you about our guest. Carol Bowser, JD, is a workplace conflict expert. After practicing employment law for several years, Carol founded Conflict Management Strategies when she realized a lawsuit can't deliver the level of resolution and satisfaction that is gained when people are actively involved in creating solutions to their workplace conflict. Carol's clients come with a wide range of employers because conflict is universal across all industries and types of organizations. Where there are people, there is conflict. The key is to help people recognize and address conflict before it damages working relationships and creates organizational drag. In her over 20 years of experience, she has discovered some universal themes about workplace conflict and loves to share how people at all levels can strengthen their conflict resolution muscles. We need some of that. Carol, welcome to the Bombshell Business Podcast.
So pleased to be here.
I don't even know where to begin. I'm just super excited. For the pre-show, I was telling you that to me, creative conflict is an empowering thing. Conflict helps give us the contrast of, well, I don't really know what I want, but I know what I don't want when I hear it. And so that's how I approach it. So I don't shy away, but I'm also a super aggressive personality. So I know, that kind of makes things different too. So let me just ask this question before we even really dive into the details. At what point as an employment law professional did you make that decision that I just read in your bio? Like, at what point did you just want to bang your head against the wall and you're like, we got to do it differently?
Well, I think like most career development, it's kind of comes over time. And then you have this kind of maybe an aha moment or maybe just kind of a nagging piece. And one of the things that I found is that when people would call seeking legal advice, that they would describe situations that sounded icky and maybe unfair, but unfair doesn't equal illegal.
Yeah.
And unfair isn't always something that a lawyer can help with. But there were points of pain, and it was, whether it was on the employer side or on the employee side, it was impacting people's lives. It was impacting the organization. And it just seemed like there really wasn't a good resolution to it. However, I had taken mediation training and become a mediator before going to law school. So I just had this different lens, that it wasn't this paradigm of, well, this is what the law does. This is what we can do. This is how we could strategize it based on my legal training. I kind of came at it from a more, okay, what's important to people? How are they feeling impeded? Can they actually articulate what they want in a way that other people can hear it?
Sure.
And then how can I help them get unstuck? And that's what I liked, as hearing people's stories and asking the question, well, what do you want help with? And it was just unsatisfying that it's like, again, it sounds like it's a bummer of a situation, but it's really not something that the law could help you with. And also as a business owner, or as, someone, as a lawyer, we're there to be, in most cases, lawyers are there to be able to build relationships with clients to be able to get paid for their services. So it also may be, that sounds like a bummer. Technically you may have a cause of action here, but I'm not seeing a damage. It's gonna that would be sufficient for you to be able to pay me to do this, or it's going to be so cost prohibitive and so long and so disempowering of a process that I'm going to tell you straight that I'm not going to take the case because I don't think it's worth it for me, and you need to decide whether you're going to think it's worth it for you. So people are still sitting there in pain and discomfort and a lack of resolution and kind of looking for help. And I'll get on my little soapbox for a minute here. Is we call it the justice system, but the system's definition of itself is notice and opportunity to be heard. When we call it the justice system, people think it's their personal brand of justice.
Yeah.
Which systems aren't about the individualization of it. The systems are about the systems and processing people through. I think of it a lot like Disneyland sometimes, but without like the good characters. It could be as expensive, but without the good merch. Is that, the systems, try to design to get people to move through the system, and moving through the system may or not be helpful to actually resolving what the disagreement is. So, ultimately, it's an independent decision maker who's going to make a decision for you based on the rules and the parameters and the boundaries of that particular system.
Yeah.
That's kind of disempowering, I think.
It is, but it's also what's real. So getting back to that concept, right, of like, well, what is real? What are we really dealing with? What are the real parameters here? And then what are the real outcomes? And I ran a campaign for a judgeship in particular. And she said frequently during her campaigning, I did not go to fair school. I went to law school. And there is a difference. And so especially nowadays, I do find that the generation coming in, and listen, I made two of these Gen Zers, so I'm not bashing, but the perspectives are different and the expectations are different. And then when you put that in the parameters of law, there is a lot of conflict there between the expectation and the reality. Do you see that?
Absolutely. And that's one of the things a tool that I talk to people about, because I believe in every conflict or tension or disappointment or frustration, it's that gap between what the expectation was and kind of what the reality is. And we don't fill that gap with sunshine, puppy dogs, and, caramel lattes. We fill them with blaming and shaming and labeling and frustration and disappointment and a lot of anger and sadness. And I think that then the emotions come to the front and we're dealing with an emotional piece. I know that you've talked about kind of emotional stories and, dealing with the emotion. But yeah, if people want to jot this down, this is my go-to question. It was when I was a mediator for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Whoa.
When I was doing that on a contract basis, I would ask the employee, because it would be the employee who would be filing the complaint or the allegation for harassment, discrimination, or retaliation. And I would always ask, help me understand, what did you expect the employer to do in this circumstance? And so getting people to identify and articulate what their expectations are, that's the first point. That's kind of the starting point of a conversation. And no, it wasn't like, no, I've heard what you said, I read what you said, and, I don't think that that's accurate. It's just really being able to articulate the expectations. And again, the expectations may be unrealistic. They may not be how the business or the culture of the business or the law says that they're supposed to do things or should be doing things. But that, I think, is the starting point for the exploration and for people being heard, and people being seen. And that's huge. And if we could just even start there, oh my gosh, just see your people, see who they really are, allow them to be who they really are. That automatically reduces all of the fear, both as the employee who is happy to be seen, but then also everybody else who knows, again, the truth, what we're working with.
So, what I've found, especially among women in business, is that when they're trying to de escalate, then they actually make things worse. So, can you talk us through that phenomenon? Like, why does that happen? And then what do you do when it does?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of different things that go on there. Is one, it's really good intention. It's a good intent. Then we use words like, hey, calm down, or don't worry about it. It'll just be okay. It is what it is. Or as my assistant, Patty, will say, you just need to get over it. And what happens is that if the intention is to de-escalate, what that actually does is completely escalate it, because that is saying you shouldn't be concerned about this. Well, we don't live in their shoes. We don't see what they see or see what they experience. Or maybe we want to be caring. And so we want to be reassuring, but then it's placating. And if you're hiring people for their skill set and their mind and how they see problems, solve problems, and connect, if they're in some way saying, I have a concern about this, and you're saying, well, it's going to be okay, I've seen more leaders get into trouble that way because the people feel minimized. They feel not seen, not heard. And also, there are some people who just have a much more things will work out okay in the world. We don't need to overplan. We don't need to overanalyze, but maybe your overplanning or overanalyzing is them saying, I need for you to look critically and objectively about this and don't rely on your gut. And you know what? There are some people who may be perceived as negative, but maybe you hired them because it's their job to be a risk manager, to look at the analytics and bring it forward. You can make a completely different decision. However, if their job is to bring forward the risk stuff, again, lawyers, maybe the CFO, maybe your bookkeeper, maybe the IT person who's troubleshooting things, and maybe even if you're working with HR, part of all that professional training is to identify and minimize risk. And here's one thing that I would love for all of leaders to be able to do is we can talk about unmet expectations, but also let's start bringing into a language of recognizing that different people have different risk tolerances.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
And if you're saying, don't worry, it's going to be okay, for those who start businesses, you are a risk taker and you are much more comfortable with ambiguity and the poop hitting the fan and just like, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out. And I've heard some of your podcasts talking about how you kind of like structure and you like guidelines, but it's like, don't expect me to follow them all of the time. We can drive other people who like the structure, who say we set guidelines, we set expectations, and we have systems and processes, and you just blow through them, Carol or Amber. And so again, kind of pairing that with the, what are people's expectations, and part of their expectations come from how they see risk. Do they see risk as a good thing? Risk as a bad thing? Are we asking them to do things that feel too risky for them, so much that it's causing stress and mental anguish and a feeling of burnout? Those are all important things, and all of those things drive conflict.
Yeah, 100%. And, that's why even in branding work, you would be so surprised how many different opinions there are about who the organization is. And so to be able to they're all true, right? Because the organization is my experience of the organization at the end of the day. Like they can say whoever they are, but it's what we experience as consumers or as employees. So everyone's voice matters. But it's why I love bringing psychoanalytic tools in, because then right away we understand, okay, you speak this language, you speak that language, you love risk, you don't like risk, you're proactive, you're reactive, you're more social, you like to talk your ideas through, you like to think your ideas through. If I walk in your office and you're deep in thought, I am interrupting a conversation. Like I need to understand that about you. And I think that alone helps us. Maybe, I don't want to say that it stops conflict. It just makes the conflict easier to process because we all understand who the players are and what we're dealing with, as opposed to just thinking the whole world sees things the way I see them. And it's ridiculous that you don't see it that way.
Yeah. And I I'll go back to, I think all of our professional training really imprints on us. For example, I will tell you, law school warps your mind. You want to have an annoying conversation, find a first year law student, because it's just, we're learning so much, and we're learning frameworks, and we're learning about how to address things and putting language to things. And it's just different. But that's different than folks who are in the CFO role. CFOs, people know, are very different from bookkeepers. And that's like, in the finance and stuff, that just like stuff blows my mind. However, we all have professional training and workplace experiences that really kind of inform us about, well, this is the way to do it. I've said often, you want to start up, trouble, go into a group of mediators, the peacemakers, the ones who help other people address issues, and tell them about the way that you do mediation. And you have got a fight on your hands, because it's deeply personal.
It is.
How people do that, and what forum they utilize these skills, and who they utilize it for is very different. So one of the takeaways I would love for all of the bombshells out there is, when we're talking about big concepts like conflict or leadership or proactive thinking, those are just concepts. They're very aspirational. But being able to put kind of behaviors and answer the question, it's not just what we do, but this is how we do it here, that is representative of who we are, what the brand stands for, how we manage risk, how we view conflict, and even how we want to start approaching these conversations when we disappoint each other.
Yeah.
Because, it's late in the labor market, and even, working with vendors, working with your close trusted advisors, working with people. If you're in a relationship for any period of time, you will have disappointed them at some point, and they will have disappointed you. And most people won't have the conversation. They'll just kind of live within the disappointment. So that's why I think conflict resolution skills, and kind of building those muscles and developing language for recognizing about, how you feel disappointed and what your expectations were and what you were looking for, but then also being able to listen for what their expectations might be. And that's like, those are de-escalators of conflict, rather than, leading with the blaming and the shaming, and, maybe even the people who are super directive. We got a problem, even labeling it as a problem. Like, well, that sounds like it's a problem for you, but I'm perfectly fine with how it's doing. But as a mediator, I always train other people. It's like, if there's a problem for one, by definition, there is a problem. Or if at least we don't want to label it a problem, we can label it a concern.
Yeah.
And we can address the problem versus minimizing, oh, don't worry about it. No, that's not a problem. No, it's not an issue. So things like that are important to, keep on your radar screen, because it's not just how you lead, it's how you live your life and how you empower or inadvertently disempower other people.
Yeah. It's interesting, because I've always said I don't need to be right, because that's subjective. I don't need to be right. I just need to be heard. But if I'm not heard, we're going to have big problems. Like, if I'm involved and you have expectations of me in this situation, but you will not hear me, then why am I here? I don't need to be here. Because
you bring up such a great point, because I see this with leaders, because part of my process, if we're going in and addressing conflict or tension, or what I call kind of, organizational drag, that I will talk to leaders, and then I'll also talk to different people. And here's a side note: because of who you are, how long you've been with the organization, and what position you hold in the organization, you will view things differently. You will define the problem differently. Therefore, you will define the potential solutions differently. And so we're talking to a variety of people. And one of the things that I talk to them about is, well, tell me more about how you want to give feedback. And people say, I've given feedback. I've addressed this multiple different times, but nothing gets done. And as a side note, I'm not sure that nothing gets done. However, there are likely many thought processes and conversations that not everyone is privy to.
Yeah.
But if they don't see how the feedback that they have given you has impacted your thinking and impacted your decision making, even if it is, I really value that, And by the way, I kind of even hate that phrase, because if you say we really value feedback, but we follow with the but we decide to go a different direction, means like, well, then, why am I doing this? If we say, this is what I heard was the main concern, this is what I heard was the insight, this is what I weighed in making my decision. And at this point in time, one thing for a variety of different reasons, some of which everyone is not privy to because it's not out there for public consumption. These were the decisions I made, and I had to weigh a lot of different factors, including this. Because people will say, they say there's an open door policy, they say they want feedback, we give feedback, yet we don't see our feedback being implemented. We don't see our proposal being operationalized. And then if they don't after a while, then you're kind of, ingraining learned helplessness, because, well, why is it if I go to all the trouble of organizing my thoughts, taking time on your calendar, and I never see how my feedback or my thoughts go into the problem solving and go into the implementation, then it's like, well, then, okay, well, then that's fine. I understand what my role is, and my role is doing these tasks, and that's all it's going to be.
Pretty.
Yeah.
For years and years and years, I've always played the role of, company voice, not the mediator, but the liaison between the company, the senior leadership, and, your director level, middle management, and then frontline employees. And it's really the closer you get to senior leadership, because that you start to get ultra frustrated, because you have enough information to have an opinion, and a decently informed opinion, but you don't have all the information to really understand what's going on, in the belly of the beast. And so as somebody who is privy to all the things because of my role, and I couldn't say anything either, and then you have this disappointment with the, senior managers or director level, and, beneath VP, I would say, that's just a really uncomfortable place to be, because you have all of this responsibility. You're a working manager, but you don't really have the high level of authority to significantly enact change. And so you're playing this in between role. So I always had to set people down and just say, your frustrations are valid. This is real. Really validating what their concerns were, to your point, calling it a concern, because it wasn't necessarily a problem for the company. It is a concern for this particular department, but in light of all the other things that are happening, like, this just has to be for right now, because the priority, the finances, the attention, whatever that is, has to be on these things, because at the end of the day, we're here to make money, and we have to drive revenue, or we have to make shareholders happy, or, whatever that is. There's just so many factors. So if you're in that middle management position, or maybe you're the owner of a company, you're an entrepreneur, and you're not going to put the weight of all that nonsense. And that's truly what it is. You're being protected. I'm going around the world for this question. I apologize. I am a person who talks my ideas out. Let me back up. The question that I have is, what advice can you give to leaders, no matter where they are in the company, who have information that would make that person feel better, but you can't share it? That's the question.
Ew, that's terrible.
It is. It happens every day.
So I'm going to give a similarly sort of roundabout answer, because one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking was, the difficulty that middle managers, and one of the things that I think as people go up in the hierarchy of any organization, it could be a nonprofit, it could be, government, it could be absolutely anything, that they're kind of expected to be strategic thinkers. And strategic thinkers are different from tacticians. And it's kind of that middle level management of, they're trying to translate the strategic vision that go into, kind of goals to tactics. And not everyone thinks strategically. And one of the things I hear a lot from leaders is, well, I need for them to think out of the box, which makes me gag in the back of my throat, because you're assuming that everybody is living in the same box, and that they even see the box or the limitations. And strategic thinkers want people to start thinking more strategically, yet they probably hired people who were really good tacticians or really good at getting something done. And there's supposed to be like this magic thing that happens at some point in time that all of a sudden you're supposed to develop strategic thinking skills. And it might be depending on the business that then you need to start maybe developing a book of business, which may have very, very little related to what the actual professional training was. And that can cause difficulty that we're kind of looking at each other and saying, well, why can't you just? And if senior leaders are thinking, why can't they just? Then that is an indication that you're labeling and shaming and blaming and imposing your experience on them. And it might be that they view that it's your role to help them just be able to do this or to be able to help them lessen the pain. Then we've got the middle managers who are kind of stuck in that place where it's a little bit icky, and maybe senior leaders. And we see this all the time. It might be in, mergers and acquisitions where you really can't go through the process of saying, hey, by the way, I'm looking at selling the business and we're doing all of these changes to be able to make sure there are systems and processes in place. And a little asterisk by there, if there's bad juju and conflict going on, I get called in to be able to say we need to be able to hand off a business, including the team and the key players, to this new owner. And by the way, we don't want to deliver a hot mess. Or by the way, when new owners, new people come in, realize that how we treat each other internally doesn't live up to the brand that we say externally, or that our internal customer service pales in comparison to where we tout our external customer service.
Carol, we could go skipping into those fires together.
Yeah. And so going back to the original question of, one phrase might be, there's a lot of stuff going on, some of which I'm not at liberty to be able to fully discuss. However, I know that X, Y, Z and 47, 32 and 36 and the yellow orange are important to you and your team, and know that I understand that. And I think you or your team might have made similar decisions if you had the same information that I did. So I think that's a nice way of saying, like, hey, there's stuff going on in the background that I am privy to that I can't share with you. I see this a lot in human resource work where there's a complaint and people understand that we have to respect confidentiality, even though emotionally it is amazingly unsatisfying as a human being to say, intellectually I get that, but emotionally I'm still processing it. And so being able to say, there are things going on that I may not, and conversations going on that you may not be privy to, it doesn't mean that they're not happening. And I'm hoping that you might be making similar decisions, or that I think you know me well enough to know that these are the types of things that are influencing my decision. And how can I help you and your team, or what is it your team is needing to be able to deal with what I kind of call the emotional turbulence of this?
Yeah.
Is there a way that your team needs to feel seen and heard? What obstacles or unintended consequences are happening as a result of this that we need to be able to deal with, that's causing the emotional and organizational drag? Again, it's a conversation of not minimizing, of like, well, it is what it is, which again is one of those escalated terms, which is just saying, okay, we can control certain things, but it's like, okay, well, how can we deal with the impact? How can we process the impact? Are there things that we could be doing? What suggestions or does your team have? And I'll also say it's not a one size fits all. Yeah. And also there's a woman who I was stealing the quote from, and it is not a problem to be fixed. It is a relationship to be managed. Right. And it is an ongoing relationship. So it's never really a one and done.
Right. And, if you even just thinking about it in your personal relationships too, it's very similar. If we keep the problem out there, the challenge, the problem, the friction, whatever you want to call it, put it out there. It's not your problem. It's not my problem. It's this problem out there. And we're on a team together. We're on a team trying to figure out this problem. And you have information and I have information. And, I can't share all the information. You probably can't share all the information either, because they're protecting their team and the things that were said in confidence. So they can't throw their team under the bus. So we're only bringing the things that we know are safe to bring to the table. And then we're trying to solve this challenge out here to reduce the friction. But the minute you start pointing fingers, you're done.
Yeah.
It's just done. And so I love how you framed all of that, but I also know that you have a framework to prepare for difficult conversations. So can you walk us through that?
Sure thing. So very simply, I share with people, I think once in terms of what are some unmet expectations and being able to talk about those. And also I want to think about, what are potentially their unmet expectations. And I'm going to give a shout out to my dear friend and colleague, Jeanette Neiden, who does a lot of stuff on negotiation. And she said, we don't want to treat our assumptions as facts and then act upon them. But because I will tell you, bad things happen when that happens. And she will tell you bad things happen. And so I'm thinking about, what are potentially my expectations? What are potentially their expectations? And just being able to think about it. But here's just very simply in these conversations, I say, can we just think about this? And it's very kind of goal oriented, but I don't want people to take away and saying it's going to be overly goal oriented, but it talks kind of about how people approach stuff. It's like, okay, as a result of this conversation, what do I want the person to know? Is there something I want them to know? And here's a little asterisk that we tend to, in the US, we tend to inundate people with information, assuming that, well, any rational, decent-minded person, if we just give them this information, of course they would agree with me. It doesn't work in religion, doesn't work in politics, it doesn't work in how we raise children, and it really doesn't work in the workplace either. But again, it kind of starts thinking about how we think about things. What type of information are we putting a lot of stock in? What type of information is more impactful in our decision making, and going back to before, and also in our risk analysis.
Sure.
So what do I want them to know? So it's okay, do I want them to know how this is impacting me? Do I want them to know that the team is struggling with mental health, that the team doesn't feel heard or seen, or that they feel as though this new process or policy is making them objectively seem less competent in their jobs? Okay, all of that stuff. What do I want the other person to know? What do I want them to do as a result of this conversation? How do we take this information into an action item? Do I want them to do something different? Do I want them to do more of the same? And so again, we're kind of thinking goals, because otherwise we're just talking. We're just talking about stuff, we're just venting, and we have more information, but we're not translating that into some type of operational benefit. So what do I want them to know? What do I want them to do? And here's the thing, how do I want them to feel as a result of this interaction with me? So if we think about it, we're thinking about action, we're thinking about knowledge, we're thinking about feeling. And doesn't that really, it's almost kind of like a mind, body, spirit connection of we're looking at all of those three different things. So as an organization, how are we operationalizing knowledge into behavior to meet goals and objectives? And that even could be employee engagement and retention and recruiting. It could also be, what are the tactical goals? How does this link with the strategic goals? And we're cascading down knowledge or cascading up knowledge. So any people at any level, if we start framing things in that know, do, feel, and the feel should be consistent with creating a micro-cultural climate. That if we say we value people, we value collaboration, okay, well, really? How is this conversation doing that? And as another side note, I have yet to find anybody when I ask, do you have a shared definition of what collaboration looks like in practice?
Oh,
they always go,
good.
I don't think so. Well, then I guess we have differing expectations of what collaboration would look like then, and that causes conflict and tension.
Well, and then there's different, again, based on personalities, based on your wounding, based on all kinds of stuff. We all come with a different perception of things. And, technically, it just depends on what you look at. But from a behavioral profile perspective, not necessarily a personality or personal branding or whatever, but just strictly from this is how I like to do work. I'm hyper independent. I'm not particularly collaborative, but if you were to ask anybody in my life, maybe not my siblings, but who are some of my best friends, I talk to them every single day, but in that world, I'm hyper independent but in a work environment, a learned behavior was it takes all of us, and it's exhausting to do it by yourself. And so I think what I want to pipe in, because, we've both addressed certain things of like, well, some people are this way and some people are that way. We are all wired, just in your mother's womb, you're wired a certain way through the first couple of years of your life. And then you have all of your life experiences. Then you have your childhood wounding. Then you have your adult wounding. You have all this stuff that you carry around in life if you haven't processed it. And even if you've processed it, you still have a little sprinkles here and there. That does not recuse you from being curious about why you're responding the way that you are. It's this podcast episode isn't about how to be right. It's about how to, what's the word I'm looking for? Empower everyone through the vehicle of conflict. Is that a fair way of saying it? If we know there's going to be conflict, then can we use it for a positive?
I think so. I've got so many thoughts. So one of them is, I'll just say that I think conflict is a little bit of a loaded word because, if you look at the statistics that, there is abuse and neglect and violence and, generational trauma that goes on. And we carry that with us, like kind of like on, like in our skin. And when we talk about conflict, and this is one of the things that I don't want to necessarily use the word gentle, but conscientious of, is that for some people, avoiding and minimizing literally was a life-saving skill and continues to be a life-saving skill. And then all of a sudden, when we talk about collaboration and speaking up for yourself and carefrontation and whatever little ways of doing it, they're all paradigms of, can we talk to people and bring forward concerns? So that way, if people are open and interested in making changes, we've at least given them the benefit of the doubt to be able to try. And all of the different things that we bring, to able to be conscientious of it. And I do think that when the tempo and deadlines come up and we're managing so many different things, it becomes really difficult. And it can be inefficient, and even how we define collaboration and how much we want to collaborate and how much maybe somebody else's need and desire to collaborate may be creating organizational drag for us.
Yep.
That we're just saying, like, I need to be able to kind of give some limits in and I talk about like kind of like what are the guidelines of the relationship. And it doesn't mean that everybody gets to say, well, this is how you get to interact with me. But the situational and personal awareness of, this is where I feel most comfortable, this is where I thrive, but when and where and with who do I maybe need to flex up and flex down, so that way we have an organizational and a team definition of, this is what the collaboration zone looks like here.
Yes.
Which is, it goes back to kind of our earlier thing of, maybe an individualized idea of what justice is. And everyone has an individualized idea of what a good supervisor is, or what a teammate is, or what a good collaborator is. However, leaders and everyone, I think if you can start having the conversation of, well, what does collaboration look like here? And let's get beyond the big aspirational, conceptual types of things and going to more behavior of, like, when I respond to emails within 24 hours, that's collaboration. When I keep free time on my calendar for people to pop in to be able to grab me, or if I'm reaching out, and maybe this is a generational thing too, there is an entire generation of people that have a foundational belief that if it is really important, you will pick up the phone and call.
Yes.
Otherwise, it is just that I have autonomy and I will get to that when I get to that. And if you don't pick up the phone and call, I'm going to assume that I have some freedom of when to get that. So it's even beliefs around the use of technology. Is it collaborative? Is it humane? Is it not humane? Whatever it is. So it's not just the what, but it's the mode of collaboration, and having teams and leaders say, what does collaboration look like for us here? because it's going to be very different at the senior level than it is down on the front line level, because there's different types of decisions being made.
Amen.
And different types of availability.
Different availability and different levels of consequence. If the wrong decision's made, there's so much that you've said. I mean, we could have like 12 other podcast episodes because of the richness of what you shared. And, I think one is really defining terms. I know when we do brand guides, when we pick tone or personality, like we have to define those words because words have different connotations for different people. And when we do our service basics, so you have your mission, you have your vision, you have your values, and then, it's really important to have service basics as well, because then no matter what, come hell or high water, these are the things that we all have to do. But we don't just say like what it is. We then say, and this is what it looks like. Like, here's what the service basic is. And then here is the behavior that supports that. So it's crystal clear that this is what we mean for everything. So, when you're talking about conflict, you're also talking about communication, and you're talking about, to your point, structure and guidelines. And if you don't define all of those things on behalf of the company for the team members, especially who are coming in who don't know the ropes, and then reminding people as you evolve as a company. You talked about M&A work. We do a lot of that. So, the company is quickly evolving when you're dealing with mergers and acquisitions, whether you just were acquired, you just bought something, you just got a cash infusion, whatever that looks like. Being able to, at any scale that your company is, I don't care if you have a salon where you rent 3 booths, what is being shared by Carol today cannot just be this idea in your head. It has to be supported throughout your employee experience, every touch point along the way. You have to be clear about how you do things when you're hiring people to make sure that they are agreeing to what they're coming into. You have to onboard people to ensure that they get, this is a high priority for us. We communicate, this is how we deal with conflict. This is what, blah, 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 all those things that we've talked about. Engaging your team is constantly showing up in the way that you said you would when you recruited them. And when you're departing, if there's conflict, you still need people to be heard, because guess what? They're going to leave the company. They're going to talk about how that was handled. And then that's your employer brand. So every aspect of what we're talking about today is incumbent upon you as a leader or as a business owner to weave it through from start to finish.
Absolutely. And to build on those points, how many people have been in conversations where we spent so much time talking about things, and then people leave the meeting and they're like, okay, we talked about it, but other people leave the meeting feeling a decision was made. And other people leave the meeting thinking, I'll kind of throw my husband under the bus. He's like, yeah, we need to do this. So I'm like, we? Who's we? My stuff for this is done. You mean you? And so, but how many people say, well, HR will take care of this, or the marketing team will take care of this, but we don't necessarily designate like, okay, well, we're gonna do these things. We're gonna have. I was working with a client, and we set up this whole piece to be able to kind of reestablish trust, because they found that there were like differing definitions and different expectations. So they were going to have an interim meeting before I came back to be able to say, okay, we're going to talk about this. We're going to share knowledge. We're going to, kind of have a little bit of a system to do this. And then I get back, come back, and it turns out that, oops, I didn't specifically ask the question, okay, well, who's going to own organizing this meeting? And nobody had the meeting. And it was like, that was kind of the main thing, to be able to slowly put a foot back in the water, metaphorically, to rebuild trust. And then it's like, well, nobody really wanted to have this meeting because there was so much lack of trust. But then even when we started putting it out, it was this whole idea of, well, who was supposed to do it?
Right.
So if you think about that causes a different type of organizational drag. But if you're thinking and organizing your thoughts of that know, do, feel, and when you're talking with people saying, hey, this is a framework that, we want to be, efficient with time, and we want to be able to do these things. I'd like for you to present your idea maybe to the client or this, I want to know what your no deal framework was. And so that way, because different people may have different ideas of what information is important. And some people say, well, that's a great idea, but you're asking me to do something that's outside of my job description. It's a great idea, but not within the budget or the strategic plan or the timeline. So if you can think about those types of things and train people of like the know, do, feel, and you're saying we want it to be consistent with the brand, we want to have it be consistent with our internal culture, and this is how we do it here. And it's more powerful of saying, I know that we value transparency, so I want you to know this, but I also know that we value confidentiality. So I'm trying to balance transparency and confidentiality. And that's why I want you to know that. And then as a result, this is my ask, or this is what I'm doing to balance confidentiality and transparency. I hope that makes sense. So it's a framework to think about, and you can train people. And then you can also set the expectation of when we're troubleshooting something or delivering something, we can do it. And you figure with like branding and marketing, like what do you want your clients, your ideal client to know? What do you want them to do? How do you want them to feel in interacting with the website or your merchandise or your peripherals? And how do you want them to feel when they're interacting with, with the vendors you've recommended? It's universal.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you're giving language and frameworks, because it's not, we haven't talked about anything way up here. We maybe for a hot minute, but then you bring it down to like, and so here's how to move forward, which I think is what so many people are lacking. And with just, again, a huge shift in generations running the workforce these days, there's a disconnect because of how we were raised, what our life experiences were, and that there's a huge divide once the digital nomads come along, and so that's like not worse or better, it's just different. And then you have a bunch of people leading other people who just haven't been on the planet long enough to backfill the positions of those boomers who are quite a bit older than millennials, and there's not enough Gen Xers in between. I've said this 100 gajillion times on stage and on the podcast, but the Gen Xers, my generation, there's just not enough of us. So you've got people with less life experience who are leading other human beings who, to your previous point, just have a lot of stuff. We just have no clue where people came from or what their belief systems are, or how us asking them to do certain things are incredibly triggering. And it's like, I need you to do this, but if you can rush 3.5 years of therapy, and then, you know what I mean? Like, we can't ask that of people. So it's like getting really curious about who are we working with? How do I lead this person? How do I respect and honor this person? But I also have to hold them accountable to what we need them to do, because it's really their job. Like we've hired them to do it.
Amber, you bring up so many points. And I just had this conversation with a client that I'm going to be coming into and doing kind of, training about, conflict resolution and how do we have these conversations. And I had this little turn of phrase, and I hope it's helpful for the listeners, because I think that newer generations are really, they can be great at demanding change. I'm not so sure they've developed the skill set or the maturity to facilitate change.
Yeah.
Because particularly in the workforce, every system and process has been designed to support the status quo. And if we're talking about ripping something up, then how do we facilitate where people can still feel successful at work? And even, the phrase is like, hey, boomer, or you just don't like change, or you just don't get it, or they're too slow. People in the workforce at all levels want to be seen. And there's some of us who can say, you know what, I have been through several economic downturns. I have been through, so I have some lived experience and I have some knowledge to share. And I also want to feel respected, and I also want to feel heard. And if you're just throwing back, you don't like change, you're just, you're just this, you're just that, just a racist, or, you're just stubborn and whatever it is, it's just realizing that other people want to be heard, and just being able to say, based on my experience, these were some considerations that have informed me in my professional life. And then and then being able to have some of those conversations, because chances are you can come up with some solutions that might touch on to some minimum degree of what people need and what they're looking for in the workplace and what they're looking for in their client relationships.
I love that. What a great ad. Absolutely. It goes both ways. And really, at the end of the day, isn't it about just respecting people's humanity in general? Can we just do that at all times, or at least make that the goal, and then maybe it will naturally smooth out a little bit if we all have that intention?
Maybe. But I think also different people have different definitions of what respect is and how it's demonstrated, because the exact same behavior with someone can be symbolically significant of showing respect, and the exact same behavior for someone else can be symbolically significant of showing an absolute lack of respect. So it's, what does respect look like to you here? How do you show respect in the workplace? What can I expect from you? How do we and again, going back to the workplace, how do we demonstrate respect here?
I love it. I feel like I could talk to you all day, but we're going to have to wrap it up. So I'm going to ask the same question I ask every guest, every episode. And that's just, what parting piece of advice do you have for our bombshell listeners? Bombshell being redefined to mean a bold, brave, unwaveringly confident woman in business.
I would say you can be uncomfortable or slightly unsure of having the conversation. You can do it anyway. And I want to add a little asterisk to it again. You don't have to do it immediately, because sometimes it takes a little while to go take a walk and kind of noodle over it and, not ruminate over it, but take a little while. And so you can have the conversations. And even if it doesn't go the way you hope it to, just say, can I still want to have the conversation with you? Can we try again?
Yeah.
And I think that's important.
I do too. I love that. Thank you for that. Well, let's talk about how people can find you online, because I have a feeling that there is ample opportunity for you to help various organizations. So I know that you have a conflict tip of the day.
Yes. And they can go to the website of managingconflict.com, and up in the top corner, there's a little link to sign up for conflict tip of the day, which is delivered to your inbox Monday through Friday. A tip, a trick, a technique, a video, a conversation starter, all designed to help people increase their conflict resolution muscles. And a lot of people tell me they end up sharing it with their team because it's an easy entree to start having the conversations. Then if they want to follow me on LinkedIn, a few years back, someone made me one of the top 30 people to follow on LinkedIn for conflict resolution, where again, it's kind of curating articles. And then also, take a look. I regularly speak at conferences and professional events, again, to help people increase their conflict resolution muscles. And, through the website too, if you got a question, looking for some help, you can just email me through there.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So we will put all of those links in the show notes and give you all the different ways that you can follow Carol or reach out to her if your organization is in need of some conflict resolution. Thank you again for sharing your greatness on the show. You were probably one of my most well-prepared guests, and I deeply appreciate that, because I'm hyper protective of our bombshell listeners. So thank you.
All right. Yeah, great. So be a bombshell of amazing conflict resolution skills, and, keep, as I said, they're skill sets, which means you got to practice, but then also the more that you do it, the more it will become habit. And then you're going to be the role models that people go to seek advice of, how do I go about and handle that? Which
Absolutely
would be great.
Yeah. And, bombshell, as we wrap up, I just want to reiterate that point. As I was listening to Carol so, beautifully communicating things that might otherwise feel or sound hard, I thought, what an opportunity for anyone listening to this to not only help with reducing conflict in the workplace, but to serve as a model, to serve as an example, so that other people can watch your behavior, not just listen to the words coming out of your mouth, but watching the consistency in which you handle conflict over and over again, whether it's small or large. That is your way of mentoring. And that's what the bombshell community is all about. Like, we don't have a Facebook group. We're not, we don't do things like that, because who has time? But what we can do is see and support each other for who we are and who we're becoming on a one-to-one basis. When you recognize another bombshell, tapping her on the shoulder, making sure you connect with her, being a bombshell, showing what that looks like. And part of being bold, brave, and unwaveringly confident is when we fall down, we get back up. That doesn't mean we're never not shaken. It doesn't mean that we're not ever insecure at times. It's just that we always get back on the courage wagon. And one big part of that is being able to process the harder times. So if this episode was meaningful to you, if you learned something from it, please share it with another bombshell. Share it with somebody that you know can use this, whether they're dealing with conflict right now or they're just in a position where that's probably going to be a reality for them. And then take the time to like us on YouTube, if that's where you watch, or if you're whatever you're listening at is, we would definitely cherish a rating and review, because that helps, just trick all the algorithms to make sure that more people are finding quality content like this and getting the help that they need. We're no fluff around here. So just meet, please, just meet. So thank you for your time today, and we will see you on the next episode.